friends, I'm Lisa, this is Small Kids Big God, and you're watching part 2 of some read aloud books that we have really enjoyed in our homeschool. My oldest child is 8, I have a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 2-year-old. And these are books that we've read over time in our homeschool, and I wanted to share them with you in just like a little snippet of what I thought of each in case you wanted to check it out for yourself. And of course there's a part 1 if you want to check that out too. So for this one I'm going to start with Little House on the Prairie. We loved this book. There's just something about the writing and about that family that is just an ideal living book to give you a description of the time of life on the prairie. One thing I did make a note of that I would think about if I was going to have my child read this on his own instead of as part of a read aloud is several times there's a lot of anti-Indian sentiment, which I can understand from that time period, but they say some pretty negative things that I would want to at least like talk through with my child. So if I just gave them this book to read on their own, I would at least want to make sure we kind of understood that's not the sentiment that we should have about people, sort of thing. But anyway, great book. I definitely would recommend it regardless. We read a book called In Grandma's Attic, and this is a true story written by a grandmother about the stories that her grandmother had told her. There's lots of Christian thoughts and there's lots of good morals in it, and it was just sweet and enjoyable. We'll definitely read this one again. We read the sequel to Homer Price. It's called The Centerburg Tales. This is another one that was just funny and enjoyable. The pictures were entertaining. It was a little bit over my kids' heads sometimes just because of the time period. I think it was the 1950s or maybe the 1940s when it takes place, but it's silly and clever and we enjoyed it. Okay, the book Pinocchio. This was one of the biggest surprises to me of any of the read-alouds that we've done. I loved this book, but I do want to put a big disclaimer on it. It's nothing like the movie, and just because I loved it doesn't mean it's going to be a good fit for your family, especially younger kids. The writing is superb. It was so interesting as a story. I never knew what was going to happen next. Again, seen the movie, not like the Disney movie at all. There are some really dark and heavy parts in the book Pinocchio, believe it or not. I think some people wouldn't deal with it. I think you need to pre-read the book. If you're going to have your kids read it or read it aloud to your kids, pre-read it and see if it's a good fit for your family and your kids. They're like, Pinocchio gets hung in a tree, like hung with a noose, almost died several times. There's several like dark things that happen, and there is like an idea of like a fantastical magic. I think it was easier for the kids to handle for it happening to a wooden puppet than a real person. So while my oldest child I would consider pretty sensitive when it comes to dark themes, but because this was a foolish wooden puppet, it wasn't too bad for him. The author would stop the story and talk to the reader, and he did a great job on that. The morals in the story were really clear. You see this puppet being foolish and disobeying their parents and being lazy, and you see the consequence of that. And for some reason, like, he didn't have to say right out like this is a foolish thing. My kids were able to recognize that and like internalize it, but it wasn't preachy, and it was relatable, and they were rooting on the side of good. It was one of those great books about like a dichotomy of good and evil and like, you know, hardworking and laziness, and there is like a positive ending. I think it's a great book. I would read it as an adult, not even having kids. Like, I would recommend it to you to read. It's so good. I really enjoyed it. If you read it and you think I'm crazy, I think that's a possibility, but we really enjoyed it. Okay, that's enough on Pinocchio. Another book is The Reluctant Dragon. This one is so good, and this one will not bother you. This is a story about a boy who meets a dragon who doesn't like to fight. He likes to read poetry, and it's just so sweet. And the dragon has to devise a way to make it seem like he's really fighting St. George, who comes to save the day. And I love it. It's short enough that you can read it more than once, and we will definitely read it more than once in our family. We really enjoyed it. We read The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, another book where I'd seen the movie but not read the book. Gosh, a lot of these things, the movie, well, maybe it's a good movie or maybe it's not. Oh, there's just missing so much in the story. The Wonderful Wizard of Oz was a great book. It was very different from the movie. All the characters had virtue, and there's bravery and loyalty, and good always triumphs over evil, and a happy ending. It was delightful. Definitely will read that one again. Okay, on a more simple, lower scale, Beverly Cleary wrote a book called Socks about a cat. There's a cat and a new baby. I would probably skip it next time. It wasn't that great compared to these other books. Yeah, not so much. We read the book Poppy. My kids really liked this book more than I did. This is a story of a brave, kind of rebellious mouse, and it was a little bit dark. There was some violence and rebellion, but my kids just loved it. Again, like, we like mice who talk, apparently. Yeah, those are like our favorite. Another book we read was a historical fiction book called A Lion to Guard Us. This was about kids who went to Jamestown to try to meet up with their father. Like, from England, they went to Jamestown to find their father. It was kind of depressing. The kids were slightly interested. It was just okay. It might be good to fit in with history, but yeah. We read a lot of Thornton Burgess, like a lot of Thornton Burgess. My kids love him. We read through the entire Burgess. Oh yeah, I wrote the Burgess Bird book because we don't have that. It's from the library. I don't know why we don't have it. I should buy it. It's fantastic. It's a story of curious Peter Rabbit who learns about many different birds by talking to them. My kids will read Thornton Burgess all the time. Like, and they learn so much. They're telling me all about animals and birds and stuff that I have no idea about, and I would definitely recommend it. We read Uncle Wiggily's storybook. This was cute and funny and clever. Uncle Wiggily is a rabbit gentleman who helps people and animals in an anonymous way, which is really sweet. And all the stories in it are separate, so you can just read them in little pieces, and you don't need to go in a particular order. It's always fun to have kind of like books like that on your shelf. We read The Family Under the Bridge. This one might be a good Christmas time story because it takes place around Christmas and it's really short. It's about a story about a homeless man in Paris who gets moved by the love of homeless kids to become a changed man. It's really good. It's sweet. We read The Indian in the Cupboard. This is one of my boys' favorites. It's just fun to like think about the idea of like locking a toy in a cupboard and then it comes out and it's alive, but it's still like miniature size. Like, that's really just a fun idea. And my kids really loved it. I think we got more in the series for my oldest to read on his own. We read the book The Courage of Sarah Noble. This is a really short one that is worth a read. I really liked it. The girl is brave and her father is loving, and there's prayer and positivity in it. It's short, virtuous. It's a good book. Okay, another book we read was Henry and the Chalk Dragon. I think my boys would say this is definitely one of their favorites. It is between this and Owls in the Family. They laughed, like those are the ones they laughed out loud the most. Henry and the Chalk Dragon and Owls in the Family. I just laughed and laughed through it. It's really good theme. It's really well written. I would definitely recommend it. They talk about chivalry. They talk about art and imagination being valuable and that they require bravery. This was a really cool lesson too, because me, myself, and one or more of my kids who tend to be kind of perfectionists, you can shy away from doing art or writing because you have to put yourself out there. And it was such a good book. There was nothing in it that was really inappropriate. I would especially recommend it for boys, but I think girls would like it too. Oh, there were a lot of literary references in it, which I love when books reference other books. That was a really good one. We read another book by the same author. It's called The Rise and Fall of Mount Majestic. This one was almost as good as Henry and the Chalk Dragon, but it was really great too. The story is the idea of people who live on this island where the mountains go up and down, and they find out it's because there's a sleeping giant who's lying under the island, and that's like his belly going up and down as he breathes. And so the people who live on this island need to figure out what they're going to do to make sure that their island is alive, like what happens if the giant were to wake up. There were great underlying themes. Pride is bad, prejudice is bad, worry is not helpful, bravery is good. It was funny at parts. It was interesting enough that I would have read it on my own. What I really like about this author is the fact that she includes these great important themes, like, worry not being helpful, the positivity of chivalry, but it's woven in such an interesting story and compelling that you don't have to spell it right out. Really enjoyed it. We read The 100 Dresses, and I kept putting this off because my two oldest are boys, and that sounds like a really girly book. But it was a really good book. I would recommend it even for boys. My boys liked it too. The story is about girls who make fun of a classmate, and then they decide that they're remorseful over it. And the main idea is the book is that you should not just stand by when another person degrades a person. It's an interesting moral story, and it's short too. We really enjoyed it. We read Sign of the Beaver, and I remember not liking this when I was a kid, but I really liked it now. It's definitely a book that boys would love. It's a story of a boy who grows to be a man as he watches his family's new home in the frontier while his father goes away to fetch his family. He befriends Indians, and he helps them learn to read, and there are hard times, and he makes hard choices, but overall, it's a very virtuous, interesting, adventurous book. There's a book called the Growly series that I don't think is very well known. At least I haven't seen it on many book lists. I like it because it's a good, innocent story. Again, it's like a story where animals are anthropomorphized. The first book is called Begin. It's a story of a bear who goes on an adventure to kind of become like a man, and he ends up having to save somebody else. What I like about this book and why I recommend it is it's a clean adventure story that for younger minds. So my 8-year-old has been reading at a relatively high level for several years. So one of my problems was, what books can I give him when he just like voraciously reads, and I can't pre-read everything, but he has a high reading level, but he's a little bit sensitive and he's younger. Like, what do I do with that? This series, the Growly series, is perfect for younger kids who read really well. I would recommend it. We read the Burgess Seashore book, and we read the Burgess Animal book, and those are great. Definitely recommend. I kind of talked about that earlier. We read books called Toad for Tuesday and Wharton and Morton, and these are short, fun books where the animals are wearing clothes, because those are apparently the books that we enjoy. And it's just fun. Like, it's these toads who are brothers, and they go on this little adventure, and the books are relatively short. They're kind of hard to find, though, by Russell E. Erickson. I always look for them in a used bookstore, like in case I could ever come upon it. Because, again, apparently I'm cheap, and I don't just buy the books that I like. Peter Pan is another book where the movie and the book are not the same. This one was interesting. This one was interesting. There were dated things in the book. They use a derogatory term for Indians like every time it comes up, so we kind of just talked to my kids about it. I'm not going to say that when it says this. We're going to just use the term Indians. But there were pirates, and there are fairies, and there are Indians, and my boys were interested in it. And it was a good book to read. I would recommend Peter Pan. We read Among the Pond People. If you like Thornton Burgess, you might like this. It was written by a kindergarten teacher for her students in the early 1900s. I thought it was cute and similar to Thornton Burgess books, but I like Burgess better. I'm not going to read any more of hers, but you might enjoy them, or if your kids are running out of Burgess books, if that could even happen, check her out. We read the 21 Balloons. We listened to it via audiobook, and that is a really good way to do 21 Balloons. It's an adventurous story. You don't know what's going to happen. I think my kids would really like reading it again when they're older. Definitely recommend it. We read Along Came a Dog. This book, I think I got it off the Ambleside Online list, and so I was like, okay, this is going to be good. And people said it was funny. It was really slow and boring, and I learned way more about chickens than I ever want to know, and that's kind of what we got from Along Came a Dog. But apparently, I'm in the minority on that one. A couple books that we also read are McBroom's Wonderful One-Acre Farm. This is super short, but it's silly, it's clever, it's good to have on your shelf. There's 3 stories, I think, in one. My kids laughed at that one. Understood Betsy, I was putting off because, again, I thought it might be too girly. And the first chapter is kind of slow. I wanted to stop, actually. But it's so good. Like, my husband, I would read it to the kids at night, and my husband would be like, what happened tonight in Understood Betsy? Because it was such an interesting story. I definitely would recommend it. Lots of virtuous stuff in here, and it's just sweet, compelling, like all these orphan stories. Oh my gosh, there's a theme of orphan stories that just clutch my heart. Another book we read by the same author as 100 Dresses is Ginger Pie. This is a sweet story about just a dog and the family that enjoys the dog, and I like the brother-sister relationships and just the small town atmosphere, and we really enjoyed this one and would recommend it. I would love to hear what books you think we'd like. If you can think of books that we should put on our list to read next, let me know down in the comments, or if you have different opinions on these, let me know. I'd love to hear them. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.